Welcome back everybody, Cody McIntyre here from BOSSposes. Today I'm going to be showing you a quick tutorial on how to make your own lithographs within Blender. So I've been getting asked a lot on how to make a proper lithograph because the online generators just don't seem to give you enough options in depth and all that stuff. And some people would just kind of like to sculpt onto the model without having to do all these other complex steps to be able to get the one that you downloaded into a sculpting, environment. So anyway, what we're actually going to do is make sure you have images of, or image as planes enabled. So you'll find that in your add-ons tab in your prefences. You want to make sure that's added. If you already have it, that should be good. So you're going to make sure you're in object mode. We're going to come over to add. We're going to come down to images and we're going to go to image as planes. Okay, so what this is going to do is open up one of the images that we download to be turned into a lithograph. So I downloaded a few images. I've downloaded this link right here, which is a little bit lower of detail for us to be showing you what it looks like compared to low detail and a high detail lithograph, okay? So to go into this mode, when you import your images, you may notice that you're not going to see it. That's because you're not in your viewport shaded mode. So up here in the corner, these three bubbles, these are very important. You want to make sure you click this second last one. That's just going to save you performance instead of going into full shaded mode. But anyway, from this step, we have our box highlighted. We're going to come over and go into edit mode. I have my subdivision bound to my 1 on my numlock, and I'll show you how you can bind a key yourself. So what you're going to do is right click on whatever you want to do, right click the action you want. So in this case it'll be subdivide, and then you'll just go to change shortcut or add shortcut and then press the key you want. So I'm just going to hit 1 on my numpad a few times. Make sure we get enough subdivision with inside this model just for the tutorial's sake. That should be okay because then we can add a multi-resolution after, which we're going to have to do. So after that step, after you've subdivided your model, we're going to go back into object mode. Come over to your side and click on the wrench, and this will be your modifiers, and we're going to add a modifier called displace. This will be under deform. What this is going to do is displace the texture that's on top of the object, right? So what we're going to do is click displace, and you're going to notice the image is going to get a little bit bigger, but that's perfectly fine, so don't worry. The next thing we're going to do is click new. That's going to go back to normal. Go to your coordinate and set that to UV, okay? So these are the two options right below strength and mid-level we're going to be playing with, but for now we're going to skip this step right now because we still need to finish the displacement on our model, because as you see it is not a lithograph yet. Okay, so you're going to come back up to the top here where it says texture. Don't click anything else or this X. You want to click these two little bubbles at the side, the very end, that look like two pills. Show in texture tab. We're going to click that. We're not going to worry about this box. We're not going to worry about new or open. So you may think that you would have to open your texture here or your JPEG image, but it's already imported. So we're actually just going to click the browse image, this little box over here that has the picture in the mountain, and we're going to select our image. And right away you're going to notice that link is now displaced off of the plane. So now you can actually turn off your texture because this is going to give you kind of a ghosting effect. So now when I go back, I should have more of a clear view of what's going on here. And as you see, it is really messed up, right? So that'll be it for what we have to do in this tab right now. So actually come back over to the side, click the wrench again, and we will be returned back to where we added the modifier. Now we can start playing with this strength in mid-level. So with the strength, I'm just going to change this around just to show you that you can do forwards and backwards very, very simply, and it is very accurate with detail, okay? I highly recommend just clicking on the side here, because the more subdivisions you have, the better the detail you're going to get. But just clicking on the arrow seems to be giving me the results that I'm looking for. So as you see, we have a good subdivision like that, but it is really high. So what I'm actually going to do is make that inverted. So I'm going to make that like that, but then when I look at the back, right, I'm going to see stuff like this. I'm going to be like, well, that doesn't look too good. What we can actually do to fix that is, instead of using the strength modifier to increase and decrease the depth, we can actually just take the width and make that a little bit smaller. And as you see, now we have a pretty good lithograph. It's a little bit blurry. That's just due to the amount of subdivision we added within the model, okay? So say this is the lithograph that you wanted and you say that looks perfectly fine. You're like, okay, cool. Now I just kind of want to clean it up a little bit like this over here, or the inside of Navi. So what I'm actually just going to do, just to come over here, hit apply on that. You don't have to in case you want to make changes later. I'm going to go to add modifier again. I'm going to come over into generate. and I am going to add a multi-resolution. Multi-resolution is going to add an extra resolution on top that's not going to deform the model or the base model. So if I didn't have the multi-resolution on and I went into sculpt, it's just going to start pulling all of the lines in together. But since we added a multi-resolution, we have a second resolution on top of our own that we can actually sculpt. So it's like a thin skin that you're able to sculpt without pushing important geometry around. So what I'm actually going to do is go into sculpt mode, and I'm going to come in and I'm going to show you, for example, when I go into smooth, turn down my strength on my smoothing, that I am able to smooth Navi without actually messing up the rest of the geometry that's around the wings and stuff. So, and again, for example, I'll actually remove this modifier and then I will try to smooth it. You'll notice that it starts to pull all of the other geometry around it. So what I'm actually going to do is just go back, add another multi-resolution again. So I'm just going to add that back. You can do your subdivision here also. If your model isn't high enough detail for you, you can come back into object mode. I believe it's object mode, and we can actually subdivide it one more time. And as you see, that came out a lot clearer. And we could probably even do it again, but I recommend taking it easy on the subdivision because that does add a lot of performance down cost on your computer. So I'm actually just going to do this again. I do have a pretty powerful GPU and CPU, so I shouldn't have too many problems doing subdivisions at a high level. But you'll notice when I start doing subdivisions too much that it's going to actually start to flatten out our model a little bit. And if I look at the back, you'll notice that the back has also been subdivided, which is really good because it kind of cleaned that up for us. And this is the kind of depth that we're looking for to allow light to pass through, okay? So that just shows us that we do have density on our model and it's not just going to stretch and pull through on the other side. It's not pushing the shape of this as well, because if you don't have enough subdivisions on your lithophane, this will start to bend. And I'll show you that on the next image and how we can avoid that or fix it, because we can actually fix that back into where we added our modifier for displacement on the mid-level slider that we didn't touch yet, okay? So I have our link, lithophane. I'm like, okay, that looks pretty cool. The hair needs to be cleaned up a little bit, so I'm just gonna go into sculpt mode. I can even add my creases, general brushes, and stuff like that without doing too much damage to the model. And as you see, I just turn it up. I can smooth out whatever I feel I need to. So, which is very, very good for editing lithophanes, because if you find when you do the downloaded ones and you download a lithophane and you go to sculpt on it, the vertices are all messed up and it's going to start pulling in this corner with this corner, and it's a huge mess to clean up. So it's just so much easier to make your lithophane in Blender because it's 3 times as accurate, you have more control, and it's faster than having it emailed to you, surprisingly. So the next thing I'm going to do is add in my next image. So we did that one with it has a bit of a lower detail. So what I'm actually going to do is import another image. So image as plane, and I'm going to scroll down. I'm going to find my image, and this one's going to have a lot more detail than the link image will. And I'm just going to pull that over here. You can even resize it if you want with S, but I highly recommend if you do Control A and then apply all transforms on that, just to make sure everything's okay and make sure the texture and the UV match that size. I've had problems sometimes doing that, and for some reason the image doesn't scale with that, oddly, and it's an image plane. But anyway, so when I go back into my view, you'll notice I got some Daniel Craig James Bond going on here. So again, I'm going to come into here. I'm going to subdivide this model. I'm probably going to subdivide this one a little bit more. Or what I can actually do is not subdivide it and show you what I mean. Or you can test it yourself. Just try adding a displacement with no subdivision, and you'll see that it'll just deform the plane, right? So we want to avoid deformity in the plane, but we just want to deform the detail or emboss the detail that's on it. So again, I got my subdivided model. It was really well subdivided that time, so I'm going to come back over to my modifiers. We're going to add a display. He gets bigger, smaller. UV, click the pill, come down, click the little box next to new, and we're going to find Daniel Craig. Shabam, we got our displacement, which you can see the amount of, these are called islands, and these are the amount of pixels that it takes to build a lithograph, and there we have a lot of islands, right? So that's really good for the amount of quality that we have in the image. So I think I may have subdivided it enough. If not, we can do it again with the multi-resolution. So what I'm actually going to do is come back into my strength, like we did before, And we're just gonna tweak this up a little bit. And as you see, we have a little bit of jank going on, but that's probably just something it picked up from the background. You can clean all that up in Photoshop and whatever it is you wish. And as you see, we do start to run into some issues at higher detail. You'll notice that all the islands start to blend into each other. That's all has to do with subdivision. So if you have a low performance computer, I highly recommend using something with less background detail, something with less skin detail, something more along the lines of this link, because as you see, the differences are quite major with this. And as you see, we do have a bit of deformity in our plane. We can change that with the mid-level. So I'm actually going to come back in here and just kind of play with this a little bit and see if we can clean this up. So I'm going to turn this to the side, and I'm going to play with our mid-level. And you're going to notice with the mid-level that it's just going to move the plane back and forth. That's actually just setting the height map for like the texture here, or the displacement. And as you see, we got more of a crisp outcome on our suit. Bring it down, and as you see, the mid-level kind of brought out a little bit more detail. It kind of rounded out a few more islands. So we're going to keep that. We'll keep it inverse, so we'll keep it like that. And then again, we can come in and we can actually just flatten it like this if the detail's too much. And now you see that we actually brought out a lot of the detail that wasn't showing before due to the island count, okay? So then we can keep doing this. We keep bringing out detail, and then we got more of a crisp edge on this. And again, the aliasing around these edges all has to do with subdivision, right? And as you see, all of these islands are very, very sharp. And we can actually try to fix this. Again, we have to go into here. I'm going to leave this open in case I need to make modifications to it. I'm going to come down, I'm going to add a multi-resolution. I'm going to come down to my multi-resolution, I'm going to hit subdivide one more time, and as you see, that really cleared up some of the alias problems that we were having, but it's also going to start removing some of the detail like around in the hair. So we can actually, with this multi-resolution, is unsubdivide the model, which is amazing instead of going back. But now you see when we unsubdivide the model that the islands are going to refuse in a different way. That's because when we use a displacement modifier, it's going to generate the islands at a random way that's best fit for the computer. So since we did modifications before we subdivided it again, it blended all the islands together. So that's something took me a while to figure out why I kept losing quality the more edits I was doing. That's because I kept changing subdivisions as I was doing the edits. So just make sure you don't do that. And if you want to go back from these steps, don't unsubdivide or subdivide and resubdivide. Just hold Control and press Z and go back on your keyboard. And as you see, it'll just bring it right back up into normal. And as you see, we have sculpt resolutions, so we can change just our sculpt resolution, render, and our viewport. But for in this case, that's more than enough than we need because we have good subdivisions on that, a multi-resolution, and we also have a Dintoppo brush that we could use as well. So what we can actually do to come clean this in is use the bump. So the inflate tool, sorry, that's what I meant to say, the inflate tool. And what we can come in is actually just start to inflate some of the details that we want out. Don't worry about the texture coating that's around it. We can fix all that shortly. But just anything that you want to pop out, you can do that. And as you see, we're getting a lot more crisp detail around the hair. And since we added a multi-resolution, this should just follow the path pretty good. You don't have to worry about going outside of the lines too much, because it seems to generate what it seen on the basic image or the stock image that we imported. And as you see, we got a bunch of cracks and stuff like that. We can polish that up as well. So the gun, it could come out a little bit more. You can just do that. We can even set a base height. So if you come into your tools and you come over here and you come into stroke, we can actually set a stabilize, and we can even set a persistent base, but the persistent base only exists with the layer brush unless you make your own brush, which I'll show you in another tutorial. So we're just going to inflate some of this. It's always best to use the fall offs and stuff like that. That way you get an even sculpt when you're bringing things out. But just for the tutorial, I'm just doing this really quickly. Because certain things in Blender, when we do the depth and stuff like that, it's going to make certain things negative and certain things positive, and sometimes like this, it's not always the right thing that needs to be positive and negative, right? But it does do a very good job. Like the nose, for example, I would really like to bring out. And then if you're having edge issues like that, feel free as well to use your crease tool. I find the crease tool works really well on planes. And as you see, you can get a nice round off. As you see, we got a really good nose on that right now. So if I zoom in even further, I have really bad zooming settings. I think it's on dolly. So it slows down when I zoom in. So I'm just going to go up. See, this is what I mean by the multi-resolution. Is actually just going to start to pinch everything. So it kind of follows the path. But you still have to be pretty careful, right? You don't want to do that too much. And as you see, we got really good detail around the face there. And it's the mouth that we really want to clean up, right? So there will always be a little bit of cleanup that you have to do when it comes down to this. And you want to be very careful not to pinch too much together because we don't want to scrunch the detail, right? We just want to emphasize the detail. So I'm going to come up. Just going to kind of do something like that. For that, if you can't get the crease in there, that's just because this chin is already below the point of what I call no return. Well, I guess there is a return, but go like that. Let's kind of sculpt out his face, right? So we got all that going on here, and as you see with his eye, we got some problems coming in here. So we just kind of bring out some depth. You don't have to do too much to bring out detail in a lithophane, because if you think about it, the light behind it's going to be doing all the work, not necessarily the eye prior to being lit, right? So just go like that, get some detail. Maybe you can get some of these laugh lines, wrinkles, whatever you wish to call them. Just kind of sculpt those out like that. Maybe even come in here and just kind of, you know, do that. Fatten his chin out a little bit. You can get his ear. We can fix the ear later, that's fine. But as you see, we got a good James Bond going. We can even come in now and start smoothing parts out. So, for example, we can start smoothing this out if we wanted to. Get rid of all these cracks. That's why it's best to use the layer tool. That way everything paints at the same layer. That way there's not so much of having to do this part. Because you can just slap a whole layer right on, all at the even base, right? So sculpt that in. We could even re-triangulate it, because that's one thing we also didn't do after we subdivided the model. We can actually triangulate it. We can even probably do it from this point. So when we're back in here, you're going to notice that I have a bunch of squares. So when people do normal sculpting, they don't normally do this, okay? So this is usually for generic edits or, you know, low poly edits and stuff like that. What you actually want to do is make sure you have them all highlighted, come into face, and then triangulate. Now what this is going to do is split each of one of these cubes into two faces. So now we've actually doubled our resolution for sculpting just by adding more lines to our existing subdivision. Are the Blender gods with us? Don't worry, even people with great computers still deal with Blender crashes. I'm really hoping that's not the case for this, but anyway, we'll wait for Blender to finish doing its thing and holding up all of this, and I'll just kind of pause the video until then. Luckily, Blender has an auto-save feature, which I will show you if this does correct. Well, it happened. Blender crashed. Go figure, right? No problem. So that's one thing you're probably always going to have to get used to in Blender. It does that. That's fine. It's just going to have to become a normal thing. But you probably can't see the tab. For some reason, OBS won't pick it up. Come up to File, and then come down to Recover. You want to click the Auto Save feature, and it's going to open up a folder. Go over to where it says Date Modified in the category list, and make sure you have the very last one at the top. Double click it, and it should just open back up on your project. Boom, and we're exactly where we need to be, right? So right where we are sculpting. Perfect. That's why I like Blender, and a lot of the time Also, Blender is crashing because it is saving and cleaning up in the background. You can do that, and you can clean all that up. You can turn off the autosaves, but I highly recommend you actually just leave your autosaves on and leave them just at default. I find if you increase the autosave by a minute, you're always too late on your project, so just leave it at where it's at, and it seems to be working fine. But as you see the difference between our two images, this one's pretty damn good, ready to go. If I were to put a light behind that, that would look fantastic. And if I go over to this one, we have that as well. And if I go into my shaded mode, we even have emboss detail on our image, so I can actually come up to the image, delete the image. Now we have that. I can actually come down into my HDRIs with this beautiful little plugin called Blender Kit. I'm going to add an HDRI. Please don't be a big HDRI. Wonderful. But as you see, that's how you make a lithophane, lithograph, whatever you want to call it, in Blender. And it's so simple. Now all you would have to do is export your litho as an STL, print it off. You know, you can add some more thickness. You can add it to another shape. You can do whatever it is you really feel you wish, right? So as you see, that looks pretty damn good. And if I were, see if we can get like a transparent material on this. I don't know if a glass would look any good or something like that. Maybe we can get a paper, so maybe we can try this deep blue on it. Yeah, that didn't really pan out as well as I thought, but as you see, we do have embossed detail on our plane, and it's pretty much lithographed. So there's one more thing I want to show you guys as well. So yeah, let me actually just kind of delete that. So okay, that added extra stuff to our model, but that's fine anyway. So now you're probably wondering, well damn, that's way too thin, and you're probably wondering why we wouldn't just stretch it back out. Is because we want to make sure everything is the same thickness, not just in one direction. So we're actually just going to come back in and we're just going to apply all of our modifiers. This will also save a lot of performance when you apply the modifiers, but most of the time you can't go back to them, okay? So the next thing we're going to do is go down to solidify, and as you see, our detail didn't solidify, but the density of our plane did. So now, when I increase the thickness, we have something that looks more like a lithophane, right? A lithograph. Now we can actually bring that down, clean it up. That's a big thickness for something like that. There's also complex modes as well, but I highly recommend you just go to only rim, and that should just make sure it's evenly thick. But as you see, if I go to fill, I turn off fill, we have issues like that, so you just want to make sure your fill's on. Only rim will give you the same result. Only rim is just going to make sure everything on rim is going to be even as the rim, so it's going to be as thick as that, right? So now we have that. That would be good as printable. So now we're going to come back into link. We're going to do the same thing. We're going to apply all of our modifiers to link, come back down, and we're going to add a solidify. Boom, we added a solidify. And you're going to notice sometimes when you add a solidify, that it's going to start to solidify the inside of the object, and it's going to start to push through geometry. Again, just click only rim. That should fix your issue. You can even do complex modes if you want. These can be a lot of fun to play with, especially if you have a complex model. But seeing as we're just dealing with a plane, we don't really need to be worrying about that. Simple is more than fine. And you just pretty much export that. Another thing you could actually do as well is come up to here, add, or sorry, not a plane, we want to add a cube. Flatten your cube, or a plane, it doesn't really matter, I just use cubes. You can even just bind your lithophane to another object or a frame. But again, the point to a lithophane is to allow light to pass through, but this just shows you that you could make borders around it, and to do that, you would just take your lithophane, you would size it. You will need the bool tool enabled on in your add-ons, okay? And then you're going to copy this, you're going to paste this, you're just going to press S, make this a little bit smaller just so you have this outline. That's just going to make sure everything's perfectly fine, right? And then you're going to hold shift, you're going to click the existing cube, and then you're going to press the minus key on your numpad. Let me just get that back, go back into X-ray. We'll be able to see a little better, just like that. Okay. Then we're gonna make that a little bit thicker. That's why it's gonna cut out the whole thing. We're just gonna move Link out of the way, and we have our frame punching through both of the sides, I would assume, just like that. Now, this is where the bool tool comes in. Hold shift, then click the object, and then the minus key. And now we have a frame for our lithograph that's pretty much matched the same as this. You could even subtract this from the shape, but that's how easy it is to make a frame for your lithograph. Now, you could probably just line that up. You could already have it just already, you know, lined up, and then just cut it to the exact shape if you wish. You can even just come in and edit like so. Now, to bind this to your lithograph, as you see, we have depth on both sides of it. That way we can put lights in there. You're just gonna click your lithograph, hold shift, click the plane, shift, control, and then plus on your numpad on your keyboard. Sometimes this will bind. This usually only has an arrow when binding when your model's too thin and there's not enough intersecting geometry to detect. But as you see, this turned out to be perfectly fine. And now when I rotate it, you'll see that I have a lithograph, a lithophane. Pretty cool. I hope you all enjoyed today's video. I will be doing a whole bunch more Blender tutorials for 3D printing and so much more for animation. So if you liked today's video, please do like and subscribe, and I hope you all found this useful. Have a great night.